Great, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. What would a webinar be without a fun question to start things off? So I promise this will come back and make sense. But if you could just take um, a second here and just within the chat, share your name and your role. Curious where you're all coming from. But also, what was the first car you owned? And then maybe what's a question you have about problem solving for individual students? And I'll try to address these as we go along. And like Eliza said, at the end, we'll have some time there. So be thinking of that. I have it in the bottom here on this slide, but just to give a little more context of me, my name is Jason Harlacher. I'm a senior researcher with American Institutes for Research. Within that role, I serve as our director for the MTSS Center and co-director of our Wyoming MTSS Center, which is kind of an offshoot of the center. And then for the National Center on Intensive Intervention, I conduct TA and support to educators around intensive intervention. So really going to focus on that for today. And there's plenty of people. So I see lots of school psychologists. My background is in school psychology. I worked for about 6 years as a school psych, and then started to kind of move up, worked at the district level, the state level, and in the past, I've worked as a district level coach, a state level coach with the Colorado Department of Education. I've worked with Marzano research for a bit, and then I've been with AIR for about 3 years now. Just looking through. Great, thanks so much. A super bug, that's a great first car. Mazda 626. That's a sporty one, if I recall. Oh, love the Saturn Ion. I remember dreaming of wanting a Saturn when I was in high school. So, Kent, Ohio, welcome. Actually from Dayton, Ohio myself. Great, thanks everyone. Continue to introduce yourself and share. So again, a car you first own or questions around students as well, around problem solving. So today, really, I have two broad goals. One is to share kind of problem analysis in relation to database individualization or DBI. So really kind of focusing on that piece. To me, I have a bias that that's the most important part of figuring out what students need. As part of that, I'm going to talk about assessing instruction, curriculum, and environment to support learners. So ICEL is the acronym that comes from that. And I will warn you all right now, I'm going to make plenty of references to the 90s and to a certain rapper in the 90s, because one of the key concepts is we want to look at how the instruction, curriculum, and environment, or ICE, supports the learner. And so it's really figuring out how those three supportive features or areas support that learner. So you can guess the song that I'm referencing. I am going to use Mentimeter throughout this next hour. So to get us all started, I have a hard-hitting question. What is the best song of the 90s? My apologies if you are too young to appreciate how good the music was in the 90s. I certainly have that bias being a teenager during that time. But there's two different ways to join Menti. Sorry, I'm reading the chat. Yes, Benjamin's ahead of me. You can use the QR code or go to menti.com and use the 7133211 code. So I can see everyone coming in. And I'll leave that up. That's not interfering. Wow, I'm disappointed. I mean, you can tell from the photo if you looked on your phone. Nirvana to me was iconic, but it looks like TLC was just as iconic for folks here. So stay logged in. You can use the QR code. But once you get logged in, as we flip through the questions, it should progress for you. Zombie's a solid choice. as well for that. Great. I'll give folks just another like 15 seconds there to get into Menti. All right. Um, well, we will check back on the results, TLC and Nirvana. I will brag that I actually got to see Nirvana when I was in high school. Um, Convinced my dad to drive me and two of my friends to the show. Who knew what would happen after that? You Ought to Know is a great song as well. So I'm going to stay in the 90s. I'm going to start with kind of framing around a story. My dad was in the Air Force. I grew up moving kind of all over the US, and we lived in England for a bit. But when I was a kid in the 90s, we were driving from Mountain Home Air Force Base all the way to Dayton, Ohio. So you can see um, currently it's a 28-hour drive. I think it was longer back then because the speed limit was probably a little lower through some of those states. But my dad was a big car person, worked on cars his whole life. And so me and my brother, we're sitting in the back of his 55 Oldsmobile. This is not the actual Oldsmobile, but obviously this is what it looked like. He had a red and white one. But we were driving across the country with my family. It's, you know, me and my brother, who's a year older, with my dad in one car, and then I believe my mom and my oldest brother were in another. And so we are driving through Idaho. This was really the first time I remember seeing mountains and being that close to them. And so it looked a lot like this. It was snowy and cold out, and we're driving really just right next through the mountains as we're kind of going through Idaho. And so we get about 30 minutes, 30 miles outside of Pocatello. We had stopped because my parents had friends there. And all of a sudden, the power to the car shuts off, and we kind of coast to the side of the road. The car wouldn't start, it wouldn't roll over. And we're kind of sitting on the side of the road, wondering what's going on. Obviously, I'm wondering what's going on as a kid, and so is my dad, who was driving at the time. So my, oops,
035724487.
that's, sorry about that. So my question for you all, if you were in that situation on the side of the road, the car won't start, it won't roll over, what would you do to figure out the problem with the car? So just kind of take a second and put in, what's that first thing you would do? So call AAA, call my dad. Well, your dad's sitting in the front seat. This was the 90s, so we can't text, cry. Yeah, there might have been some of that. Kick the tires, open the hood, call a car expert, um, ask someone else, ask Google. Yeah, let's see, call my head. So a lot of phone calls, call my dad, check the gas, check fuses. Yeah, see if there's power for lights and radio. I can't remember if there was, but so looking at some gauges. Yeah, so you're beginning to problem solve and see, what is going on, what could be the cause of that. And so that's what you're all engaging in, is that problem analysis. I'm kind of scrolling through here. But you're looking at your information, looking at the lights, you pop the hood to see what's going on. I see in the chat, blame my brother. We did have to call it a tow truck there. Um, See if the radiator is still attached. I think we would notice that right away. See if it's overheated. I think people are thinking. Wave someone down, walk to the closest house. Yeah, this was the 90s, no cell phone there. And I think that's what I wish I could remember quite, but maybe somebody stopped and we were able to get to a payphone to call. We called our friends and they came and got us. Well, we ended up discovering the car got towed, and it was the fuel pump went out, which I learned that day. When a fuel pump goes out, the entire car goes out and it doesn't work. So you basically just have a big piece of metal until that gets fixed. So we ended up spending the night again in Pocatello because back in the 90s, you can't get car parts as quick or they're not in stock. And so we had to wait a day and so forth. But what that illustrates is that problem analysis part. We knew the problem, and then we wanted to spend time really figuring out, okay, why won't the car start? So, oops, let me back up. So that leads us into database individualization, which I'm not going to spend too much time on all of these steps, but on this graphic is how DBI how NCII conceptualizes that process for supporting students with intensive needs. That is our database individualization process. So parts of it hopefully look familiar with progress monitoring, with the diagnostic data and so forth. But it's this ongoing process to figure out what students need when what we first provide them isn't working. And so for me, I really want to focus on this diagnostic data piece, which to me is that problem analysis we just talked about, or we just introduced with the car breaking down. So we knew the problem identification part was pretty easy. There's no power, all the gauges in power read 0. The car wouldn't roll over. We had very obvious signs the car wasn't working. So the question is, well, why did the car stop? And that's that problem analysis that we begin to engage in. Why aren't students progressing, or why isn't that car working? And so when you are thinking of students, to me, I'm a big believer that all problem solving takes place within the context of a team. We typically don't want to work alone when we're supporting students. And so we want to pull that team together and problem solve why the car won't start, or rather why a student or students need additional support or a change in their support. But if you've been on teams, and I'm sure many of you have sat on teams talking about students, what is the problem, if you will, when teams problem solve? So we're going to come back to Menti, and I'll pose that question. What happens when you pull teams together and you want to problem solve and talk about a student? What are some of the issues that you've run into? Get stuck on admiring the problem, absolutely. Lots of opinions, yeah. Talk about things outside the control. Yeah, jump to solution, not enough good data. We spin our wheels, love it. Let's keep that car analogy going. We'll come back to it. Anecdotal data. Yeah, no focus on strengths. Too much focus on the student, not other variables. Yeah, so you can see we're coming together to problem solve, but we kind of get stuck, right? Kind of scrolling through here. The answer to everything is an IEP. Yeah. We don't consider all data equally, opinions versus facts. Yeah. So you can see, I mean, you're all right on with what the research shows. One of the first things we see when we look at teams and literature is they spend too much time in problem identification. So some of that problem admiration. So if you can imagine, if your car broke down, the check engine light turns on, which tells you got a big problem. So imagine if my dad and we're sitting there on the side of the road going, yep, the car won't start. Look at that big orange engine light, check engine light. Yep, car won't start. And imagine if we just spent 20 minutes looking at the light. That's kind of what we fall into with students, is we look at that glaring problem and we stay there. We don't really know where to go. When we do move to problem analysis, we actually spend the least amount of time as a team in problem analysis, but when we do, we spend time on things we can't change, those inalterable variables. So like many of you mentioned already, we talk about things outside our control. So imagine standing outside a broken down car and going, man, have you seen gas prices lately? Boy, those are high, aren't they? That's stuff that's really outside of our control. So how does that help us solve a broken down car in front of me? So right on with that. And so what do we do? Where do we go from there? One of the first things is to understand the context. So I don't have a Menti for this, but if you've ever owned a goldfish, you can relate. let's imagine you own a goldfish, maybe your kids or yourself as a kid, or maybe you have some now. If you walked in one day and the fish didn't look like they were doing too well, what are some things that you would check to see how they're doing? So you can think through that if you want to put that within the chat. But you might think about the water, the temperature of the water. Is there too much food, not enough food for the goldfish? Is the water looking healthy, or is it, maybe has a green tint to it? What about some of the other things within the fish tank that might be affecting? And so you can think about understanding the context. We want to know what's around the goldfish, or if you will, what's around the student or the learners, so that we can begin to support them. What can we adjust and manage around that? And so it's about identifying those alterable variables that we can change. And I will come back to this throughout. It's the instruction, the curriculum, and the environment. So what can we kind of mold and adjust that is within our control? And so for today, I'm going to share a couple of resources and walk you through some things of how to assess aspects of instruction, curriculum, and environment. And so you're probably asking, well, how can I remember to analyze alterable variables when I'm sitting, in a team meeting? And thankfully, we have this iconic song to help you remember. So it's thinking of how does ICE support that learner? And I really wish I could have played the song right now, but there's certain copyright issues. We don't own the rights to Ice Ice Baby. But hopefully you're singing it in your head right now. But we want to understand, again, how does that instruction, curriculum, and environment support the learner? And so that idea is kind of captured with that graphic on the right. You can see all of those three domains around the learner, and the learner being in the center. So if you put them all in sync for the student, then ideally the learner would benefit. Sorry, I got distracted. I read Samantha's. I could sing it. Maybe we'll have Eliza sing it later and see how she does. But we want to look at, when the learner is not progressing the way that we want them to, there's some sort of breakdown among instruction, curriculum, and environment. So our role or goal as an educator is to figure out where is that breakdown and how can we adjust it to better support that learner. And so we do that by using Riot and ISO. And Riot ISO refers to organizing your data collection. So Riot is an acronym which refers to assessment methods. So we can review information, we can interview other folks, both the student and those around them. We could observe various aspects of instruction and so forth, or as we all know, we could test the actual student to gather more information. And then ICEL refers to your assessment domains. So we can look at instruction, curriculum, environment, and the learner's needs as well. But with this approach, or with this sort of concept, we actually want to spend more time assessing ICE because we want to figure out how that supports the learner. A lot of times we will jump straight to the learner. Some of you we'll end up blaming the student. And a lot of times we just focus just on that learner, and that can kind of ignore some of the other more manageable things that we can change. So the Riot ISO matrix offers a way to organize your data collection. It can be a little overwhelming as we begin to look at students and figure out, well, what do I assess? How do I assess that? And so this matrix here summarizes, you can see on the first column is the assessment methods, and across, the rows are the assessment methods, and then the columns are the assessment areas. And so Amy, thank you, put a link to this PDF that you can look at. But what it offers is a way, different variables that you can assess as you begin to form your hypothesis as to why a student may not be growing as fast or as much as we need them to. And the way it's structured is review and interview are our less intensive or time-intensive assessment methods. and then observing and testing are more time intensive. So you can think of going from the first row down to the bottom as increasing in the time and resources. And then ICEL is organized to where instruction is probably your relatively more easy aspect to assess as you move to the right to go curriculum, environment, and learner there. But we want to focus on instruction first because that's probably our easiest area to modify and adjust. And the way it's organized, I mentioned you want to start with a hypothesis. At the very top, I'll zoom in, but under instruction, curriculum, environment, learner, there's a general hypothesis question that you could ask. So with instruction, we want to know, is it evidence-based? Is it explicit enough and intense enough for the student? For curriculum, we want to know, well, does the student have the prerequisite skills to access that curriculum successfully? In other words, does the focus of the curriculum match what the student needs, or is there a mismatch between their need and what the curriculum is teaching? For environment, we can ask, does it support the learner in a positive, proactive way? Meaning, does it address some of those good classroom management principles that we know? Excuse me. And then under learner, we can ask, well, does aspects of instruction, curriculum, environment consider the unique learner's needs? So cultural needs, developmental needs, language needs, all of those things kind of come into play there. And there's no sort of right or wrong way of where to start. You can start in one place and kind of move around. So I'm going to talk through some of that here in a second. The one thing with the matrix is it can be hard to know where to start. So I'm going to offer some guidance on where to start as we go through kind of each one of these domains. I do want to connect to the taxonomy of intensity factor intervention intensity for NCII. The way I see, these are just different domains or different factors that you can assess. And to me, any one of those sit somewhere on that matrix. So we can look at strength. You could review the curriculum and see if, is it evidence-based and how effective is it? Curriculum is also that alignment or match piece as well. So in connecting the taxonomy to the Riot ISO matrix, again, I just see those factors as kind of sitting somewhere within one of those cells. But for me, my experience has been sometimes the language and detail on the taxonomy can be a little technical and dense for some folks. You need, especially if you're new to kind of looking at instruction and curriculum there. So what I want to offer is just some basic questions of where to start when you're working with students, and then we'll progress through a couple of resources to help you with that. The first question is always, was the intervention delivered with fidelity? I'm not going to go into that, but that's kind of a precursor. I would look there first, right? If something's not working, check that it was provided, not just provided, but did the student also receive it? We might provide the intervention as intended, but then the student might be absent or out and not receive it. So that aside, the first question I start with is really, if you look at the outcome data, is the student making little to no progress? So are they just unsuccessful with the intervention or with the current level of support? And my first thought is that's probably a mismatch between the skills needed and the skills taught. So I would look at that first. And the solution is, obviously, if that's the case, adjusting the support to better match the student's needs. I was working with a school on their Tier 2 intervention, and they were struggling and frustrated because the student wasn't progressing. And it turned out the student had a big phonics need, and the student was being provided a read naturally, which is a fluency intervention. So a great intervention is just not what the student needed for that. But let's say that's not the case with your student. The next question then is, well, are they making some progress, but not enough? That could be a matter of the intensity. So then I would look at how can we intensify the current level of support? And then you could also ask, are they doing okay in some settings and not others? So that could be a transfer issue. One aspect of the support in one setting, and then they move to a new setting and there's just not that same level of support. Or it could be related to the classroom management needs. Maybe there's something around the strategies that aren't being used from one setting to the next. So I want to kind of go through each one of these briefly and share some resources. So with curriculum, I like to connect to the instructional hierarchy because your key question with curriculum is first knowing where's the student's current level of skills or mastery of a skill that you're providing the intervention for. So I want you to think about the cars again and think about when you first learned how to drive, and you probably had the radio off, your hands were on the wheel, you were very focused, you couldn't have people talking to you, you were stressed out and heightened, and you needed quiet and concentration. And especially if you were learning how to drive stick as well. That's what I learned on. There was a little heightened level of anxiety with that. But over time, what happened? You began to master things, and driving got easier. And then maybe it started looking like this. You realized your working memory could then get devoted to other things while you were driving, whether it's shaving, putting on makeup, talking on the phone, eating, drinking, all those things, right? One hand on the wheel, right? And that's because our working memory gets freed up, and then things become automatic and we can begin to divert our attention to other things. Beyond, so acquisition fluency, and then generalization is where you can begin to adapt and modify the skills to new and different settings. So if you've ever driven someone else's car or rented a car and you get in, it feels a little awkward at first as you get used to it, but you're able to transfer your skills to that new setting. And so the instructional hierarchy is important to me because the level of instruction a student is provided and the feedback you give them changes based on the stage that they're in. So my example with the student with phonics getting a fluency intervention, that wasn't the right match. The instruction needed to change there. So you can see, this is just a summary table of the different stages. I didn't mention adaptation because typically that's not one for students in intervention where you're focused on that skill. We're really kind of focused more on acquisition and that fluency or automaticity stage there. So we have all of that information on a PDF, an infographic through our MTSS Center. So it's a handy one. It summarizes the stage and then kind of that instruction. So what we want to do when we're trying to figure out, is there a match for the student? The first question is, what are the student's current level of skills? And then you can look at the curriculum and go, okay, both within and across, does that match what the student is needed? And so keep in mind when I say curriculum, I'm not necessarily referring to a packaged program or curriculum that you buy. What I'm talking about is also the scope and sequence of those lessons and the skills that you're teaching the student. So we want to assess where the student is at. We can look at where they're at within the instructional hierarchy, and we can then take that information and look both within the intervention or across the tiers and supports to see. So let me give you a couple examples here. Like I said, my background is school psychology. So one of the students I worked with way back in the day was a 6th grade student. They had reading difficulty. Math was pretty decent, but they had a lot of referrals around negative interactions and aggression with peers. And so the first question is, well, does the level of support match what they need? And so you can briefly list out, as an example, the focus of support and then how much time. We'll come back to the time when we talk dosage. But you can see here, core instruction, they were getting grade level standards around vocab and reading comp. So we're not ignoring sort of grade level content. The small group during the core was on the phonics and decoding, so differentiated to them. And then they had school-wide expectations in the school, so the student was taught, along with everyone else, be safe, be respectful, be responsible. And then you can look at the tier 2 and tier 3. And so you can lay out all the support and ask yourself, okay, does the support target the needed skills? And does the support not target those skills that are mastered, right? We don't want redundancy when we're adding in support. We want to make sure that everything's coordinated and that we're maximizing the students' times. So from a programming, a curriculum standpoint, we would look at this example and say, okay, yeah, we're on track. We're teaching those reading skills and we're targeting kind of those social skills around those negative interactions. So at a glance here, this looks pretty decent for the student. And we'll come back to this because you're probably looking at that and going, I don't think the dosage is good enough. And you're right. So we'll come back to that here in a second. The other thing you can look at then is within the supports. So am I really targeting what the student needs within that? So same school, I had another 6th grade student who he was getting to that age, right, where he was beginning to notice the opposite sex and wanting their attention. And unfortunately, he was walking up to girls on the playground and basically whispering things behind them to get their attention. So not the best way to get their attention. So we said, okay, he's making a lot of people uncomfortable, so let's provide him some instruction on more positive ways to interact and engage with his peers. And so we had provided some instruction, but as an example, what you could do is look at, for example, take your SEL program or your social skills program and look at the different lessons and go, okay, I don't necessarily need to progress through every lesson in order from 1 to 100. Instead, I can pull out and highlight the ones that this student needs and really provide that intense instruction for that. So I just want you to kind of reflect. Imagine this is a curriculum your school owns. You've got 4 units and the bulleted points are the different lessons. Are there ones you would highlight and are there ones that you would skip? So I'll just let you reflect there for a second. I'm just looking at some questions. Yeah, the flow chart. Yeah, we'll have to get a PDF up. I didn't think of that. Let's see. Great. And so for me, I would look at this and probably say, okay, maybe the healthy mind we don't need to emphasize right now. Maybe the emotion management less so, maybe some of those lessons, but he probably really needs unit 4 and maybe some unit 2 lessons. So you could pull out ones and sort of create that personalized one. But I will say no curriculum is really perfect for a student. And so more than likely, especially around, looking at the behavioral programming you might provide for a student, you may have to create your own lessons. And so we have kind of this general template that comes from Langland and some of the PBIS work that they did. But essentially, there's 6 steps within this lesson plan, but you could use this as a template to create lessons. We have this template along with some examples on the Amy, I believe we are putting that on the website, but we can double check that. So that's curriculum. Again, there's different things. It's looking at that match and figuring out, within the support and across the supports, because reality is the intervention is a small percentage of that student's whole day. And so we don't want to neglect or put too much stock into that intervention. Again, it's just one piece. So that's curriculum. When it comes to instruction, it's asking, are they making some progress, but not enough? And really what we want to look at is the opportunities to respond within the instruction the student is receiving. So if you're not familiar, opportunity to respond is really anytime a student has a chance to demonstrate a skill or to respond to a academically oriented task or activity. And so, excuse me, you can see the graphic on the screen, but there's some sort of prompt, whether that's a teacher prompt or something from a worksheet or a book. The student can then respond, and then there's often a chance to receive feedback, whether it's corrected feedback from the teacher, or praise or acknowledgement of that being accurate or the correct response. We can categorize OTRs as verbal, written, or physical. So verbal can be choral responding. You know, that word is cat, what word? Everyone responds together. It can be individual responding, asking students a question, or peer-to-peer. So you can see a lot of the group work or partner work falls in that category. There's written OTRs, you know, guided notes, response cards, whiteboards, so forth. And then there's physical ones, just a simple thumbs up and so forth. So we're going to take a minute and watch this video. This is Anita Archer, who really is the guru of explicit instruction, in my opinion. I just want you to watch. We'll watch about a minute and a half, and just what type of OTRs do you see? So again, there's verbal, there's written, and there's physical ones.
When we listen, and this first word is practiced. What word, everyone? Practiced. Now, when we practice, we do something again and again because we want to be good at it. So if I practice piano, it would be because I want to be good at what, everyone? Yeah. Piano. If I practice the ABC cheer, it would be because I wanted to be good at what, everyone? The ABC cheer. If I practice ballet, it would be because I wanted to be good at what, everyone? Ballet. So I want you to tell your partner something that you'd really love to be good at, but you're going to have to practice. Tell your partner something that you want to be good at that you have to practice. Talk it over with your partner. Tell him your idea, sweetie. Excellent. Okay, looking up here. And Francisco, what would you like to be really good at? Listening? Saying the ABC, and you're just going to have to do what, everyone? He's going to have to practice.
So I love that video, and I feel so bad for the Francisco because he says, I want to be good at listening, and I just think of how many people have told him, you need to listen. And it's like, no, you can be good at so many other things. But in the chat real quick, what types of OTRs did you see there? Yeah, lots of choral responding, talking with peers. And I cut it short, but then she also has them do a thumbs up. So she gets the verbal and the physical going there. And if you notice, the pace was there, the engagement was there, and that's really what OTRs provide. It improves the pacing within instruction, but it also gives students a lot of practice and opportunities to demonstrate and practice those skills. Because you saw, even after she called on a student, then it was, he's going to have to do what, everyone? Practice. So really emphasizing that skill and learning that word there. So to me, one of the first things is measuring the rate of OTRs. So Amy or Eliza will put the link in there, but if you want to pull that up, or you could just use a post-it note for now, but we're going to actually record OTRs here on the next slide. But let me show you this form and how you use it. This is a form that's on our MTSS Center website. And there's the link, thank you. But essentially you can record multiple days, but you can mark the content and the format, but every time that you see an opportunity to respond, you simply just put a little tick mark, and then when you get 5, you can do that diagonal cross there. You can then tally up the total and divide by minutes to get a per minute rate. And you're probably wondering, well, how many should we see? And I'll give you that information here in a couple of minutes. But what I want to do first is I'm going to play a 2-minute video. It's again Anita Archer teaching middle school math. And I just want you all to listen and count the number of opportunities to respond that you see. If you've done this before, this can be great practice, but if not, this could be something new to add to kind of your repertoire. So I'll give you about 10 seconds to grab pencil and paper. And again, just a tick mark for every OTR that you see, be it verbal, written, or physical. And 3, 2, 1, here we go. Oh.
Excellent. Well, keeping your drawing right there, you have also looked at the term radius. Everybody add a radius to your diagram. Okay, show me. Perfection. Twos. Tell your partner using your diagram as if they had never been here, radius. Tell them what radius is. Yes. Okay, listening? Perfect. So I heard you say, if we have an endpoint that is the center and it goes to the circumference of the circle, this outer edge, that would be a what, everyone? A radius. Hey, and on yours, draw a diameter. Label the endpoints. Any label you wish. Okay, show me diameter. Perfect. Ones, pretend your partner was not here using your endpoints and your diagram. Explain it to your partner and go.
All right, so in the chat, how many did you get total? Yeah. Yeah, so about 8, and what you saw, or not about 8, I got 8 myself. You saw a variety, right? It was writing it down, labeling, showing her, and then telling the partner. So you can, again, see not just the number, but the quality and kind of that pacing. And so one of the things we can look at with instruction is, what's the level of engagement? Does the student get frequent opportunities to respond and be engaged within that instruction? The other thing that you can record with OTRs, before I show you kind of the rates that you should look for, is you can look at the accuracy of them. And so that can give you information to understand also, is the student in that acquisition stage, or are they more in that fluency or generalization stage? And so you can use the same form. You can see, when I've observed OTRs, I'll mark if it's the student's provided an opportunity, and then if the student is correct, I'll circle it. So now I know opportunity to respond and they were accurate. If they get an opportunity and they're not accurate, I would just leave it uncircled. And so over time, it could look something like this, and then we can add it all up. So here the student had 8 opportunities over 2 minutes, so that's 4 per minute. But then I can look at how accurate and successful were they, and they were 4 out of 8, which is 50%. Generally speaking, that acquisition stage, you want to see students get to that like 90, low 90s, 93% to be considered the skill acquired, and then they could really start building that fluency. That number kind of comes from more from the reading fluency and reading decoding literature and some of the math, so it might look a little different depending on the skill, but broadly speaking, you can record OTRs for a student and their accuracy to get at, you know, where's the student at in terms of the mastery there. So in terms of the numbers, it depends on the content, depends on the small group or large group. And then also keep in mind, you know, if a student is given a longer OTR, such as writing a sentence, that's obviously going to impact the rate because they're taking longer to respond. A lot of these rates come from that really quick verbal responding and a lot of that direct instruction literature. But all that said, large group should be around 3 to 6 per minute on average. And then that smaller, more intense should be 8 to 12. So it sounds like a lot, but then when you see someone like Anita, who's really mastered the variety and got it down, you can see how you could really build some in. Bear in mind though, even if teachers have like 1 per minute and then they increase to 3 per minute in large group, there's a lot of good outcomes with that. So just even a little bit of improvement even if you can't get to some of these qualities up here or some of these rates up there. So a couple more things. I'm just kind of looking at the time here. So with the OTRs, let me share with you, I would look at engagement, and there's some questions you can ask. Is there a way to increase the OTRs? Can you change the variety of them to increase engagement, or can you increase the praise or feedback? So I'm going to show you within one second step lesson here. So let's imagine this is the scripted second step lesson here on the screen. This is a 3rd grade lesson. But I counted up, this is a 10-minute time period within the lesson, and there's 5 OTRs, so you get about half an OTR per minute. You can still follow the script and add in more. You can maintain the integrity of the lesson and then add some in. You can simply, you kind of saw with Anita, you can ask a question to the group or to a student and then ask to the group as well. So up here, for example, Ari's the goalie on his soccer team. During a practice game, his teammate accidentally kicks the ball into their goal, scoring for the other team. Ari feels furious. What did he feel? Furious. Is this a good time to take a break? Why? And then getting into it. So you can build in some, and then here at the bottom, you could build in a physical sort of gesture, oh, that's a good idea when a student names something. Show me a thumbs up if you would do that. So if you do that, you can increase here to 11 plus OTRs, and it's about 1-ish or a little bit more than 1 per minute, depending on how many you do at the end. So there's quick ways that you can build in OTRs to kind of really increase that engagement. And then I see the question of large versus small. Small group is like 3 to 6, so more of that direct instruction. Large group would be like whole class, 20 plus kids or so. The other thing to look at with OTRs is you can also look at, the intensity across supports, not OTRs there, but returning to the example I shared earlier, I would look here and go, okay, this student has negative interactions, 12 referrals. This was like November when we were looking at this, so a lot of referrals very quickly. And so 30 minutes 1 day a week is probably not enough, and just reinforcing school expectations, that's probably not intense enough for that student. Continuing with, this kind of blends into the curriculum, but you could also look at within the instruction, what are the examples that are used? Can you adjust them to better reflect the student's needs? And so I'm going to share kind of a general structure for a lesson here, but let's say you have 23 minutes for a lesson, there's a warm-up, there's the getting started, introducing the content, then you have the practice and the review. Well, you could play with that time. The warm-up is really just kind of a, like an icebreaker to get kids started. So you could reduce that to 0. Perhaps you do a warm-up as you're walking them to wherever the intervention is or as they're coming into the classroom. I'd adjust that getting started part to make sure it's 2 minutes so we're in and we're getting going. So then you can see I added 4 minutes to the practice where I'm going to add or adjust examples to better address the student's needs. So for example, my student who is out on the playground saying things, I will adjust and use what he's doing as my examples to really target that instruction. And then the same thing with the review there. So thinking of instruction, and again, it kind of blends into curriculum with some of these examples, but OTRs are probably your most powerful and cheapest instructional factor to look at because it gives you a lot of information, and we know when we increase OTRs, we get more positive outcomes. But then you could look at kind of that dosage of OTRs and praise, both within the intervention, but also across as well. So let me spend a couple more minutes on the last part here with environment, and then we can look at some of the questions that may have come in. But let's say your student's doing okay in some settings and not others, and maybe you're wondering, is the classroom set up to support them? So a little bit of research, if you've looked at any of the research on students with disabilities or students receiving support within self-contained classrooms, you see a lot of a teacher requests, the student completes the request, and there's another request. So there's not a lot of acknowledgement for the student for, completing work or demonstrating pro-social behaviors, right? It's a lot of to do. You need to do this, you need to do that. And what we want to see is a request, the student completing that request, and some sort of feedback or acknowledgement. And that ties into one of the kind of 6 key factors within a classroom. So we know from about 3 different reviews of literature over the last, I'd say 25 years, there are 6 really good classroom management practices that if a classroom's not using them, they're kind of at a disadvantage for supporting students. So you can read through the different ones. It's really just teaching expectations, reinforcing them, and having structure for students getting their needs met, and then structure for responding to unexpected or unwanted behavior. And then, of course, building those relationships with students, but then also among students. For those who love research and know effect sizes, a 0.8 effect size is a large effect, 0.5 is moderate. The Cohen's D listed there, you get pretty large effect sizes related to academic outcomes for each one of these. 0.7, 0.6 is the lowest, right? You can see how high 0.98 is reinforcement and acknowledgement. It's providing feedback for providing feedback for when students are doing well. And then you can see a negative 0.8 reduction, so less problematic behavior, and looking at those behavior outcomes. So a couple of things to think about. If you've watched the viral video a few years ago from Chris Ulmer, he taught students with disabilities in a classroom, and he would spend each start of his class praising students. And so this is a big quote from him, but the YouTube link is there. And maybe Amy or Eliza, you could drop that in if that's okay. But it's just him praising and acknowledging students and changing the feedback they historically got to make it more positive, to show them he wants a relationship with them and that he cares about them. You can do positive greetings at the door. Clay Cook did a lot of good research on this, but it's essentially meeting students at the door, pumping them up for the classroom and before they come in, and just telling them, you're there to support them, pointing out things for them to think about for that day. You can have students pick the way they want greeted, a wave, a hug, a fist bump, high five. And there's a really good video from a teacher in North Carolina who had a unique handshake for every student who came into their classroom. He teaches 5th grade, and students got to pick how they wanted to greet him. And so again, we'll put the link, but it's a fun one to watch there. And thinking of the big thing I would look for, so if I'm wondering how students are doing, I'm looking at OTRs and I'm looking at behavior specific praise. So are they getting clear feedback on what they're doing well, as opposed to general praise, which is just sort of vague and unattached to behaviors. So we know common rates of praise is around 7 redirects for every 1 praise. So we want that flipped completely to a 5-to-1 praise to redirect. So you can see the general rate of praise in a classroom, both special ed and regular ed, is it's frankly abysmal when I look at it. But if we increase from, say, 1 to every 10 minutes to 1 to every 2 to 3, you can see a summary of outcomes. There are a ton of studies showing this, and this is K-12. So yes, your secondary students want praise and acknowledgement, right? On-task behavior increases to over 80%. 80% is a benchmark for on-task for classrooms. Disruptive behavior reduces to less than 5%. You see increases in engagement and academic responding. So if nothing else, when you're thinking about working with students or what's going on, I would ask, are they engaged around OTRs, and are they getting feedback at a high rate, or for things that make sense there? So a good assessment or a good tool that we have at the center is just this. You can use this as an observation or a self-assessment, but it's really just looking at those good classroom management practices and looking at, you know, does the teacher or teachers have all these in place there? So, we have a few minutes left here, so I'm going to jump ahead here. Here's again, the summary of that PDF. So actually, if for folks who are asking for it, you could take a screenshot if you'd like. I'll leave that up. But this is just my way to make sense. I know when we get into team meetings, we can get lost in the data and off track. And so to keep it focused on hypotheses, I would look at the outcome data and ask the question on the left, and then consider the hypothesis in the middle there. Yeah, Sarah, we'll link that. Amy and Eliza are dropping those in as we go. So I'm just kind of scrolling through. I'll look at some questions. So if you have, we have a few minutes and I can stay on, but if there are general questions that you have, so I'm just kind of looking here. Yeah, and I'm looking, someone brought up a good part of like, problem solving comes to a stop when it comes to curriculum, because they go, well, the curriculum is the curriculum. And so what do we do, especially with the secondary? And so what I would say is to expand the definition of the curriculum. Yes, there are lessons and standards you have to teach, but can we adjust the student supports so the lessons are differentiated for them? And can we coordinate additional support to where maybe there's a portion of that core time that they could receive some intense instruction around those things they can't access yet, to help them better access that. But it's that case by case kind of conversation, and you need admin and other folks in there. It's not something that one person can kind of solve on their own. Let's see. Another question around that Riot ISO matrix. Have you found any teams using this at a point of an eval as part of the initial eval or treatment plan? I have. So when I worked as a school psych, it was something I used and taught my multidisciplinary team to think about when we're planning and doing an evaluation, what information will help us better coordinate support. It wasn't just doing the standardized testing you have to do kind of for federal laws, but also gathering that info to better set goals and plan the student's actual instructional plan there. So good question there. Let's see. If core time is structured around the core curriculum, how does fidelity of implementation get measured when interventions interrupt the process? Or how can we interrupt the process without impacting fidelity? Excuse me. So I think there's kind of two issues I hear. Fidelity of implementation. So measuring that can be very straightforward, or it can be kind of more in depth. To me, it shouldn't interfere with the actual delivery of the intervention or the core curriculum. So whether you observe the instruction to measure it or have someone self-report, measuring fidelity can be pretty straightforward and unobtrusive or not interrupt things. You know, I always say if you can measure nothing else, measure attendance, because someone else typically records that and you can just look at that data. But that's a measure of fidelity because it tells you if the student was present or not. So if you, yeah. So I apologize, I'm not quite following, Catherine, the question you have. It sounds like yeah, if you could reword that, I'm sorry, I'm not quite following. It sounds like there might be an issue around like pulling kids out of core, which wouldn't necessarily be a fidelity. So if the intervention's replacing the core, you can still provide what you intend. And maybe the question is around like, what if the student's not receiving the core instruction? So how do you measure that? And it's probably a good fidelity measure would just be the time in seat or the minutes the student receives in the core instruction and how much time they're missing. Let's see. Well, I'll hang out for a few minutes, but thanks everyone for joining.